Peace Station Eon had seen better days. Not that it ever had good days, more like less catastrophic days, if you could call them that. The station floated in space like a rusted hubcap, creaking under the weight of too many compromises and the dubious construction techniques of a dozen species that couldn't agree on anything except that they hated each other. Somehow, the idea of using the station for intergalactic peace talks seemed an inspired stroke of irony. As the delegates arrived, each more pompous than the last, the air was thick with tension and the smell of stale cafeteria food. A fitting olfactory metaphor, really. Humans had come a long way in terms of space travel, but apparently no one had figured out how to eliminate the scent of questionable lasagna in zero gravity. It was a wonder of the universe. Captain Jackson Jax Voss, representing humanity, strolled in with all the nonchalance of someone who knew he was in for a terrible time and had accepted it as his lot in life. Flanked by his trusty lieutenant Mara Clay, he approached the council chamber where the delegates were assembling. He adjusted his uniform collar, hoping it looked more dashing rogue than underpaid public servant. "Here we go, Mara," Jax muttered, casting a sidelong glance at his lieutenant. Another day, another chance to remind these folks that we're not just a bunch of space chimps who stumbled into the galactic spotlight. Mara smirked, her eyes scanning the room filled with the galaxy's most politically constipated species. "I'm just here for the free coffee and existential dread," she replied. "And maybe to watch you make an ass of yourself." The council chamber was a marvel of bad taste and worse acoustics. Circular, as if someone thought that would encourage unity, it instead felt like a gladiatorial arena where the only weapons allowed were words and withering glares. Seats arranged like a descending spiral of doom ensured that whoever spoke would feel at the mercy of their audience, a brilliant move if you wanted everyone to feel equally hated. Jax took his seat among the other delegates, a motley crew of aliens who could barely agree on what constituted a greeting, let alone galactic peace. To his right sat K-Rax, an insectoid from the Zyxian Consortium, who constantly twitched his antennae as if perpetually annoyed by a distant, unsolvable problem. On his left was Zorg, a gelatinous mass from the Blorp Dominion, who communicated through a series of unsettling burbles. The council's chair, a towering figure known as High Mediator Glorpic, tapped a spindly finger against his data pad, calling the meeting to order. "Esteemed delegates," he began, his voice as dry as burnt toast, "we gather today to address the persistent challenge of human individuality within our shared alliance." Jax leaned back, crossing his arms. "Ah yes, the age-old problem of humans being too human," he chuckled to himself, ignoring the side-eye from K-Rax. "Can't imagine why that'd be an issue," Glorpic continued, undeterred by the sarcasm. "Human individuality poses a unique challenge to our collective goals," he said, as if reading from a manual titled How to Bore Your Audience in 10 Easy Steps. "Your species' penchant for unpredictability and disregard for protocol is a destabilizing factor." Jax raised an eyebrow. "So, you're saying our unpredictable genius and charming disregard for the rules might be a bit too much for the rest of you?" Zorg burbled emphatically, which Jax interpreted as either agreement or a digestive issue. K-Rax, however, was more direct. "Humans act as though rules are mere suggestions," he chittered, his mandibles clicking in disdain. "Your kind's insistence on thinking outside the box is infuriatingly inefficient." "I prefer to think we just don't like boxes," Jax shot back, offering a lopsided grin. "They tend to limit your options." "Besides, isn't it more fun to color outside the lines?" Glorpic sighed, a sound like air being slowly let out of a balloon. "This is precisely the attitude that concerns the council." Mara leaned over, whispering, "I think you're winning them over." "Yeah, I'm a real charmer," Jax replied, not bothering to keep his voice down. "Look, High Mediator, we all know the galaxy's a mess. You've got the Zyxians obsessed with order, the Blorps with their gelatin agendas. Hell, even the Glonks want everyone to meditate 3 times a day. But maybe what we need is a little chaos, a bit of the unexpected. K-Rax's antennae twitched violently. Chaos is precisely what we do not need. Jax shrugged. Look, all I'm saying is maybe the universe could use a little shaking up. Keep things interesting. Glorpik pinched the bridge of his nose, or at least the part of his anatomy that served a similar function. Captain Voss, while your perspective is noted, we must find a way to integrate human traits into our collective framework without them undermining our efforts. We could start a karaoke night, Mara suggested, earning a snort from Jax. K-Rax clicked disapprovingly. I fail to see how human recreational activities will address the systemic issues at hand. It's about culture, K-Rax, Jax interjected, adopting a more serious tone. Understanding each other. Look, humanity's got its flaws, but we bring something to the table that no other species does. Raw, unfiltered adaptability. Zorg burbled again, releasing a small bubble. Jax wasn't entirely sure, but he hoped it was a positive reaction. High Mediator, Jax continued, leaning forward. Maybe instead of trying to stuff us into a mold that doesn't fit, we find ways to use our quirks to everyone's advantage. Think of us as the spice in a bland stew. Glorpik considered this, his elongated ears twitching slightly. An interesting analogy, Captain. Perhaps there is some merit in viewing human individuality as an asset rather than a liability. Jax nodded, trying not to look too smug. Glad we're on the same page. Now, how about we take a break and let everyone digest this? Maybe have a snack. I hear the lasagna's particularly aromatic today. As the delegates dispersed for a recess, Jax turned to Mara. Well, that went better than expected. For now, she replied, casting a wary look around the room. But you know they're just waiting for us to screw up, Jax grinned. Good thing we're excellent at screwing up spectacularly, Mara chuckled. Just another day in the galaxy's most dysfunctional family, huh? Wouldn't have it any other way, Jax said, watching the delegates file out. Come on, let's see if we can snag some of that lasagna before the Blorps get to it. As they made their way to the cafeteria, the peace talks hanging by a thread of sarcasm and half-baked hope, Jax couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, humanity's penchant for chaos was exactly what the galaxy needed. After all, if they could survive Peace Station Eon's cafeteria, they could survive anything. Peace Station Eon had a way of making you feel like the galaxy's most unwanted houseguest. The corridors were a maze of poorly lit passages that seemed to have been designed by a committee of architects who'd never met and certainly never agreed on what constituted a hallway. The lights flickered like they were auditioning for a role in a horror film, and the air had the perpetual tang of burnt disappointment. Perfect place for peace talks. Jax and Mara navigated through the station's guts with the ease of seasoned veterans, or at least people who'd been lost there often enough to fake it. They were halfway to the cafeteria, contemplating whether the lasagna could legally be classified as a weapon, when the station gave a shudder that felt like a giant cosmic hiccup. Mara stopped mid-stride. Either the station's trying to dance or we're in deep trouble, Jax grimaced. I'd bet on both. Alarms blared, echoing through the corridors like the universe's worst hangover alarm clock. A voice crackled over the intercom, the kind of voice that made you think its owner hated their job and everyone involved in it. Attention all personnel. The station is experiencing minor structural issues. Please remain calm. Jax raised an eyebrow. Minor structural issues, huh? Sounds like code for we're all gonna die. They hurried toward the control hub, where a handful of panicked crew members were trying to hold the station together with sheer willpower and a healthy dose of duct tape. Rena Voss, Jax's cousin and the human envoy for technical crises, was already there, barking orders like a drill sergeant with a caffeine addiction. Rena, what's the good word? Jax called, striding into the chaos. Rena didn't bother looking up from her console, where screens flashed warnings in a dozen languages. Oh, you know, Just another day saving the universe from collapsing monuments to bureaucratic incompetence. Sounds fun, Mara quipped. Need a hand? Rena finally looked up, her expression a mix of exasperation and determination. If you've got any bright ideas on how to stop this tin can from tearing itself apart, I'm all ears. The station shuddered again, this time with a noise that suggested every single bolt was contemplating a career change. Jax exchanged a glance with Mara. All right, let's see what kind of human ingenuity we can throw at this mess. The control hub was a tangled mess of wires and screens, a testament to the station's patchwork construction. Rena gestured to a screen displaying a schematic of the station, where angry red lights flashed like the world's worst Christmas decoration. We've got a breach in Section 12C, Rena explained. Pressure's dropping, and if we don't seal it, we're going to have a lot more than just a lasagna problem. Can't we just patch it with some of that space-grade chewing gum? Jax suggested, trying to keep the mood light. Rena snorted. If only it were that easy. The breach is too big for a quick fix and the auto-seal systems are offline. We'll have to do it manually. Mara scanned the room, her mind working fast. What about rerouting power from non-essential systems? We could boost the sealant reserves. Rena nodded. That's the idea, but it'll take time and we're short on that. Jax rubbed his hands together. All right, let's get to work. Mara, keep an eye on the pressure readings. Rena, let's see if we can wake up those sealant systems. The station groaned ominously, cutting him off. Jax glanced around, his nonchalance now tinged with urgency. I'll try not to die, I guess. As the humans set to work, the other delegates trickled in, each more frantic than the last. Karax was twitching like he'd been caught in a rainstorm, antennae flailing wildly. Zorg oozed nervously beside him, releasing a bubble that floated ominously in the zero-G. Captain Voss, Karax chittered, his voice high with stress. What is happening to this station? Jax didn't pause in his tinkering. Oh, just a little structural excitement. Nothing we can't handle. Zorg released a series of burbles that Jax chose to interpret as a question. Rena glanced up from her console. We're working on it. If you've got any spare appendages, feel free to jump in. Karax stared, clearly unsure whether Rena was serious. This is highly irregular. This facility is supposed to be secure. Rena shrugged, her fingers flying over the controls. Well, secure is a relative term. In this case, it means we haven't been vaporized yet. Jax chuckled. Welcome to human engineering. If it doesn't kill you, it's a feature. The station shuddered again as if in response to his words. Rena frowned, her brow furrowing. We're running out of time. Jax, we need to get to the power core and reroute the energy manually. Jax nodded, already moving toward the exit. Mara, keep these folks from panicking into a bigger mess than we're already in. Mara gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. No promises, though. As Jax and Rena hurried through the corridors, the station's ominous groaning followed them like a bad reputation. The power core was buried deep in the station's belly, a place few dared to venture, mostly because it smelled worse than the cafeteria. They arrived to find the core room as they expected, hot, noisy, and about as welcoming as a tax audit. Rena immediately got to work on the control panel, her face set with fierce concentration. All right, Jax, we're going to divert power from the less-than-essentials, life support in unoccupied sections, entertainment systems, and regrettably the coffee machine. Jax's face fell. Not the coffee machine. Anything but that. Rena shot him a look. Sacrifices must be made. We'll survive. You keep saying that, Jax grumbled, not entirely convinced. They worked quickly, rerouting power like a couple of chefs trying to save a soufflé that's already collapsed. As power surged through the right channels, Rena's console began to light up with green indicators, a rare but welcome sight in this part of the galaxy. There we go, Rena said, a hint of triumph in her voice. The sealant systems are back online, but we'll need to seal the breach manually. Of course we do, Jax sighed. Lead the way, O fearless leader. They made their way to Section 12C, where the breach was conspicuous in its absence of anything remotely solid. The hull had buckled outward, creating a gaping hole that screamed imminent disaster. Rena tossed Jax a canister of sealant foam, a high-tech marvel that looked suspiciously like shaving cream. "You distract it with your charm, I'll do the dirty work." Jax grinned. "My charm is far more dangerous than you give it credit for." As they applied the sealant, the foam expanded to fill the breach, hardening on contact with the vacuum of space. It was a temporary solution, but as Jax liked to say, temporary was better than dead. With the breach sealed and the alarms mercifully silent, Jax leaned against the bulkhead, wiping sweat from his brow. "Well, that was fun. Let's never do it again." Rena snorted, replacing the now empty canister. "No promises. You know how the universe hates us." They made their way back to the control hub, where Mara was keeping the delegates from turning the panic into a full-blown riot. Karax's antennae had calmed somewhat, though he still looked like he was contemplating a new career in faraway galaxies. "What did I miss?" Jax asked, sauntering in with a casualness he didn't feel. Mara shrugged. "Just the usual, existential dread, a few threats of mutiny, and Zorg releasing an impressive number of stress bubbles." Zorg burbled, perhaps in agreement, perhaps just because he could. Jax clapped his hands together, addressing the room with exaggerated cheer. "All right, folks, crisis averted. The station's not going to implode today. Feel free to resume not trusting each other in entirely new and exciting ways." Karax eyed him with a mix of suspicion and relief. "Your methods are unorthodox, Captain Voss." Jax spread his arms wide. "That's us, the unorthodox heroes of the galaxy. Honestly, I'd have it no other way." Rena rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the grin. "Let's get back to those peace talks, shall we? I've got a feeling there might still be a galaxy to save if we hurry." As the delegates filed out, Jax turned to Mara. "Think they'll remember this as the day humans saved their bacon?" Mara smirked. "Probably just the day humans nearly made them lose it, but that's close enough for me." Jax chuckled, clapping Rena on the back. "Nice save, cousin. Remind me to buy you a drink next time we're on a planet that serves something other than recycled water." Rena nodded, her expression softening. "And remind me to bill you for the therapy I'll need after this." Together, they made their way back to the council chamber, the station's lights flickering back to life like nothing had happened, as if rust and neglect hadn't nearly been their undoing. But that was life in Peace Station Eon, a delicate balance between disaster and survival, held together by duct tape, ingenuity, and more than a little gallows humor. And if that wasn't the human way, Jax didn't know what was. The council chamber of Peace Station Eon had all the charm of a bureaucrat's last-minute tax filing. Dim, cluttered, and with a pervading sense of impending doom. Jax Voss stood at the center of it, feeling like the last buffet item at a conference. Everyone was eyeing him, and not in a way that suggested they were impressed. "Captain Voss," began Elura, the Xylithian delegate with a voice that could grate cheese, "your presence is appreciated, but we must address the latest irregularities." Jax raised an eyebrow, the universal human expression for "here we go again." "Irregularities? I thought we were talking about the station, not the food." Rena threw him a look that could vaporize small planets. "Keep it together, Jax." "No promises," he muttered back, just loud enough for her to hear. Elura continued, her mandibles clicking with irritation. "The structural failures, the alarming malfunctions, and most notably, the sabotage." Jax blinked. "Sabotage? I thought that was just the standard wear and tear of a station held together by wishful thinking and duct tape." Mara leaned over, whispering, "Looks like someone's been playing fast and loose with the maintenance logs." Jax nodded. "I always said those logs were fiction." The chamber devolved into a mess of accusatory glances, whispered conspiracies, and the occasional alien language that sounded like a blender trapped in a washing machine. Jax couldn't help but think of it as just another Tuesday. Rena addressed the room, her voice steady. "We're investigating the source of the sabotage. Until we know more, I suggest we focus on solutions, not scapegoats." Karax, feeling particularly twitchy, folded his arms a feat considering he had more limbs than a spider on caffeine. And what if the humans are behind it? This station is, after all, primarily your responsibility. Mara rolled her eyes. Right, because we love nothing more than setting up intergalactic peace stations to fail. It's how we humans unwind. Zorg burbled his agreement and Jax nodded sagely. She's right. Between that and watching paint dry, our days are packed. Rena sighed. What we need now is solidarity. Let's not break into factions. It's in everyone's interest to keep this station from becoming the universe's most expensive shooting star. A murmur of reluctant agreement filled the room, the kind that suggested everyone would agree just long enough to start plotting behind each other's backs. Jax scratched his chin, pondering out loud. Sabotage, huh? Someone must really hate this place, Mara deadpanned, or maybe just Mondays. Meanwhile, Rena was busy at her console, her fingers flying over keys like a pianist scrambling to hit the right notes in a collapsing symphony. She called out, "I've got a lead on the sabotage. Looks like someone hacked the maintenance systems. Files were altered, data corrupted." "Great," Jax muttered. "Just what we needed, a cyber vandal with a grudge." The tension in the room was thicker than Zorg's slime trails. Karax's antennae twitched ominously. This could jeopardize the entire peace process. Jax raised a hand. "Whoa, let's not throw the towel in yet. We've got a knack for fixing things that are just about to explode. Ask Rena." Rena shot him a sideways glance. "Don't drag me into your optimism." Eldura's voice slithered through the room. "Captain Voss, how do you propose we proceed? Surely you have a plan." "Plan?" Jax echoed, stalling for time like a student who'd forgotten their homework. "Yeah, of course, a plan. Rena, what's the plan?" Rena didn't skip a beat. "We need to isolate the compromised systems, find out who had access, and repair the damage before it spirals out of control." "Easier said than done," Karax muttered, his skepticism as blatant as a neon sign in the void. "Most things are," Jax replied, his tone breezy. "But don't worry, we're experts at the impossible." "It's the simple stuff we struggle with," Mara chuckled, "like making peaceful small talk, apparently." Jax nodded. "Right, so let's get cracking. Rena, take a team and see if you can find out who's been playing rogue hacker. Mara, with me. We're going to take a look at those systems and see if we can patch things up with more than just good intentions." The delegates dispersed, each in their own peculiar way, and the humans got to work. Jax and Mara made their way to the station's central systems hub, a place that smelled of scorched metal and regret. "Rena thinks she can pinpoint the saboteur?" Mara asked, her stride purposeful. "She's got a knack for sniffing out trouble," Jax said. "Besides, this place is crawling with hidden security protocols, like a paranoid cat lady's house." They reached the system's hub, a room that looked like a techno-geek's fever dream gone wrong. Screens blinked warnings. Wires hung out like entrails. It was a miracle anything worked at all. Jax tapped a few keys, pulling up the station's logs. "All right, let's see what these jokers have been up to." Mara peered over his shoulder. "Looks like someone's been rerouting power, and not for anything good, unless you consider turning sections of the station into zero-G theme parks." Jax snorted. "I've always said we needed more attractions." They worked quickly, fingers flying over keys, following the trail of digital breadcrumbs left by their mysterious saboteur. It didn't take long before Mara found something curious. "Look here," she said, pointing at the screen. "Looks like someone patched into the system from one of the delegate quarters." Jax frowned. "Great. Just what we need, an intergalactic hoojunit." Mara sighed. "Well, at least we know where to start looking." They spent the next hour cross-referencing the logs with the delegates' access records, looking for discrepancies, irregularities, anything that might point to the culprit. It was tedious work, but between Jax's reckless optimism and Mara's sharp focus, they made progress. Finally, Jax let out a triumphant laugh. "Bingo. Found a log entry from someone accessing the systems just before the sabotage began." Mara raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Jax's grin widened. "Our good friend Eldura. Looks like she's been more hands-on than her delicate demeanor suggests. Think she's just covering her tracks or stirring the pot." Mara asked, her tone skeptical. Could be either, Jax replied. Or both. Or, maybe she just really hates zero gravity. They had found their suspect, but proof was a slippery beast, and accusations could easily backfire. Still, it was a lead, and with this information, they might be able to squeeze the truth out of Elura, or at least put enough pressure on her to crack. As they headed back to the council chamber, Jax's mind raced with possibilities, each more ridiculous than the last. Perhaps it was all a misunderstanding, or maybe Elura had a perfectly reasonable explanation, like needing to download the latest episode of some interstellar soap opera. They entered the chamber, where Rena was already briefing the delegates. Jax cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. Ladies, gentlemen, and otherwise, we might have a lead on our little sabotage problem. Elura's eyes narrowed to slits. And Mara didn't miss a beat. Logs show access from your quarters, Elura, right before things went haywire. Care to explain? The room went silent, save for the gentle hum of life support and the faint sound of Zorg's stress bubbling. Elura's expression hardened. I assure you I have no involvement in any sabotage. My credentials could have been stolen, replicated, or even fabricated. This is an egregious claim. Rena interjected. We'll be conducting a full investigation. Until then, we'll need everyone to cooperate, provide any information that might help. Jax leaned against a wall, arms crossed, exuding what he hoped was confidence rather than fatigue. The quicker we sort this out, the quicker we can all get back to pretending we like each other. The delegates, no strangers to intrigue, exchange glances. If Elura was innocent, she'd be cleared. If not, well, Jax had seen enough soap operas to know how this scene played out. For now, though, it was time to step back and let the wheels of justice, or at least what passed for it on Peace Station Eon, turn. Humans were known for their resourcefulness, and if there was one thing Jax was sure of, it was that they'd find a way to navigate this mess, even if they had to use duct tape and a prayer. Mara leaned over, whispering, "Think we'll get out of this one?" Jax grinned, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "We're still breathing, aren't we?" In the end, it was all just another adventure in the chaotic dance of intergalactic diplomacy. And if they managed to save the day, it wouldn't be the first time they'd done so against the odds. Nor, Jax suspected with a mix of dread and excitement, would it be the last. Jax sat in the council chamber, the weight of 1,000 accusing eyes pressing down on him like a particularly judgmental aunt at a family reunion. The room buzzed with tension, the kind that made your skin itch and your brain scramble for an excuse to be anywhere else. Unfortunately, Jax wasn't going anywhere. He had a job to do, and it appeared that job had just gotten a whole lot more complicated. Mara leaned in, her voice dripping sarcasm. "Looks like we've poked the hornet's nest." "Hope you're wearing your bee suit." Jax kept his expression neutral, though his mind was racing. More like a cheap raincoat with holes in it. But hey, what's life without a few stings, right? In the middle of the room, Rena was addressing the delegates, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the rising storm of suspicion. "We need full transparency from everyone here. If we're going to stop this sabotage, we must work together." K-Rax's many limbs twitched like he wanted to strangle something, preferably a human. "And why should we trust you?" His voice was laced with skepticism, as if he were accusing Jax of trying to sell him a used spaceship with a faulty hyperdrive. Jax sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because unlike some folks, we prefer our peace stations not to explode. Call it a quaint human quirk." Elura, her eyes narrowed, chimed in. "Trust is earned, not given, and right now it seems in short supply." "Tell me about it," Mara muttered, crossing her arms. "I trust this station's structural integrity more than half the people in this room," Rena continued, unfazed. "We've uncovered evidence that the sabotage might not be the work of a single rogue element. It seems there's a faction within this council looking to undermine human influence." The chamber erupted into a cacophony of disbelief and denial, each delegate trying to outdo the other in righteous indignation. Jax couldn't help but roll his eyes. and here I thought reality TV had all the drama. Amidst the chaos, Jax shot a glance at Mara. You ever get the feeling we're just pawns in some cosmic game of chess? Mara snorted, a dark grin on her face. Chess. More like checkers and not the kind with strategy. Just a lot of pieces jumping over each other. Rena's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. We need to rally together. The sabotage is a threat to all of us, not just the humans. We must unite to identify and neutralize the faction behind this. K-Rax folded his arms again, a gesture that seemed to say, good luck with that. Jack stood up, drawing attention back to him. Look, I get it. Trust doesn't come easy, especially out here where alliances are as stable as a sandcastle in a hurricane. But if we don't sort this out, we can kiss this station goodbye. And I don't know about you, but I'd rather not end my days as space debris. Eldura's expression remained skeptical, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that Jax had a point. Fine words, she said, her voice as smooth as polished steel. But words alone won't fix this. No, they won't, Jax agreed, his tone pragmatic. But they are a start, and we humans are pretty good at starting things. Might not always finish them neatly, but we get there eventually. Rena nodded, her gaze sweeping the room. We need volunteers to form a task force, a coalition of sorts. We'll need representatives from each species to ensure transparency. Zorg gurgled, his eyes blinking rapidly in what passed for enthusiasm. The Glarbnak are in. Mara leaned towards Jax, who knew Zorg had a backbone, or whatever that jelly-like equivalent is. Jax chuckled. Hey, if Zorg's in, we've got this in the bag. The other delegates, sensing the tide turning, began to reluctantly agree. They might not like it, but the reality was stark. Their mutual survival depended on cooperation. K-Rax tapped a claw on the table, the sound like a tiny drumbeat of doom. Very well. The Jacktho will participate. Jax raised an eyebrow. Didn't know you liked group projects. K-Rax's eyes narrowed. Let's just say I prefer a controlled explosion to an unexpected one. With the task force assembled, it was time to get to work. The station needed to be scoured for any signs of further sabotage, and any leads would have to be followed up with the kind of tenacity Jax usually reserved for finding the last beer in a broken fridge. As they left the chamber, Mara elbowed Jax. You think this coalition is actually going to work? Honestly, Jax replied, a smirk playing on his lips. I'd give it the same odds as surviving a night on Rigel's ring with nothing but a toothpick and a prayer. But I've seen stranger things happen. They made their way to the system's hub, where Rena was coordinating efforts with military precision, her team already combing through data and monitoring system diagnostics. If there was one thing Jax could count on, it was Rena's ability to whip a ragtag group into something resembling efficiency. Mara glanced at the screens. You think Eldura's really behind it? Jax shrugged, his expression thoughtful. Maybe, but she's a symptom, not the disease. There's more going on here than meets the eye. Transformers reference, Mara asked with a wry grin. Jax chuckled. Never misses, does it? With the task force in motion, they started to piece together the puzzle. The sabotage wasn't just about causing chaos. It was a calculated effort to destabilize the delicate balance of power onboard Peace Station Eon. The faction behind it had been careful, strategic, and frighteningly effective. Someone's playing 4D chess, Mara mused as they combed through encrypted files and surveillance footage. Jax nodded. And we're stuck playing tic-tac-toe. But that's never stopped us before. The task force uncovered a series of encrypted messages between delegates, hidden in layers of digital camouflage. The messages hinted at a conspiracy to weaken human influence by any means necessary. The faction was made up of species that weren't too thrilled with humanity's penchant for sticking their noses where they didn't belong. Rena frowned as she decrypted another message. Looks like they've got a plan to disrupt communication with Earth. If they succeed, we'll be cut off. Mara cursed under her breath. So much for a peaceful negotiation. They're playing dirty. Jack sighed. Guess we'll have to play dirtier. We need to expose them before they can pull this off. The clock was ticking, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was pulling victory from the jaws of defeat at the last possible moment. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. Rena coordinated with her team, her fingers flying over controls like a virtuoso. We're close to identifying the faction's members. If we can expose them, we might just avert disaster. As they worked, Jax felt a strange sense of camaraderie with the aliens he once viewed with suspicion. Maybe it was the shared peril, or perhaps just the shared disdain for whoever was screwing with their lives. Whatever it was, it felt like progress. Mara caught Jax's eye, a glint of mischief in her gaze. "Think we'll save the day," Jax chuckled, his tone light despite the gravity of the situation. "Either that or we'll go down trying, and if we do, at least we'll make it entertaining." Together, they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth and prevent the station from descending into chaos. It was a monumental task, but one they tackled with the kind of reckless bravery that had become a hallmark of human endeavor. With each piece of evidence they uncovered, the web of deceit became clearer. The faction was led by a group of disgruntled delegates, each with their own reasons to sabotage human efforts. Some feared losing control, others resented human influence, and a few just wanted to watch the universe burn. Rena worked tirelessly, unraveling the conspiracy thread by thread. Her determination was infectious, and even the most skeptical delegates began to rally behind her. "We've got them," Rena announced triumphantly, displaying a list of names on the screen. "These are the key players in the sabotage." Jax grinned, a sense of vindication washing over him. "Looks like we're not just spinning our wheels after all." Mara nudged him. "You sound surprised." "Let's just say I'm cautiously optimistic," Jax replied, his tone wry. "Now we just need to confront them, make sure they can't wriggle out of this." With the evidence in hand, the task force moved swiftly. There was no room for error, no time for second-guessing. It was a high-stakes game, and they were all in. Rena took charge, her voice firm as she addressed the delegates once more. "We have conclusive evidence of the faction's involvement. Each of you has a responsibility to ensure the safety and integrity of this station." The chamber was silent, the weight of her words sinking in. The stakes were clear: unite or fracture, survive or implode. Kairax was the first to speak, his tone grudgingly respectful. "You have my support, for now." Jax nodded, grateful for the small victories. "We're all in this together, Kairax, whether we like it or not." As the task force confronted the conspirators, the atmosphere crackled with tension. The accused delegates squirmed under the scrutiny, their carefully crafted facades crumbling. El-Lura, who had been implicated but not the mastermind, watched the proceedings with an inscrutable expression. Jax approached her, a question burning in his mind. "You knew something, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. El-Lura met his gaze, unflinching. "I suspected, but suspicion alone is not enough." Jax nodded. "True, but it's a start." In the end, the conspirators were exposed, their plans dismantled piece by piece. The station had been saved, the threat averted through cooperation and a shared sense of purpose. As the dust settled, Jax found himself reflecting on the experience. It hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been pretty, but they'd managed to bring together species that had more reasons to distrust each other than to collaborate. Mara joined him, her expression thoughtful. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits." Jax grinned, a sense of satisfaction warming his chest. "Yeah. We might actually be getting the hang of this intergalactic diplomacy thing." Rena approached, her eyes bright with triumph. "Thanks to all of you, Peace Station Eon will continue to stand. Until the next crisis, anyway," Jax quipped, his tone light. "Pretty sure chaos has us on speed dial." Together, they stared out into the vastness of space, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, at least, they could enjoy this small victory, knowing they'd face the odds and come out stronger on the other side. And if nothing else, they'd proven one thing: never underestimate humans, especially when duct tape and determination are involved. Peace Station Eon creaked ominously, a mechanical groan that sounded like a lactose-intolerant cow being forced to drink milk. The whole place felt like it was seconds away from popping at the seams, which, in fairness, it probably was. Station alarms had become the background noise of everyone's lives, not unlike annoying elevator music, except this music screamed, "You're going to die," in a robotic monotone. Human envoy Rena Voss stood at the eye of this metallic hurricane, her mind a battlefield of logistics and metaphorical duct tape. She wasn't sure what kept this station afloat, Herculean effort or sheer cosmic spite. Either way, she had a job to do: maintain unity among the allies, who at this point were as unified as a bunch of cats in a bathtub. K-Rax, the Jackthol representative, loomed over Rena, multi-eyed and multi-limbed like a disgruntled octopus in a tuxedo. "Your station is falling apart," he grumbled, each word dripping with skepticism like honey from a leaky jar. Rena laughed, a sound that carried no humor but plenty of irony. "Well, at least it's consistent, unlike your trust issues." K-Rax's appendages twitched. "Trust must be earned." "Fine," Rena replied. "But right now, I'd settle for a few more minutes of structural integrity." Mara Clay, Jax's trusty lieutenant, leaned against a wall that seemed to be considering early retirement from the vertical alignment business. "Didn't we have a plan to keep this rust bucket from going to hell in a handbasket?" Jax, who was busy pretending he knew what the hell was going on, sighed. "We did, but it's hard to execute a plan when the universe seems bent on turning us into vacuum popsicles." The station shuddered again. Rena checked her handheld device, hoping for a miracle and getting more bad news instead. Life support systems are on their last legs. "We really need to get our act together or we're going to start looking like a bad sci-fi horror movie." Jax smirked, an expression that had seen him through bar brawls and council meetings alike. "Well, if we die, at least we'll have added to the genre." Mara cracked her knuckles. "Let's just make sure we get a sequel where we come back as vengeful space ghosts." Rena focused, her mind whirring faster than the ventilation fans that were now as useful as a chocolate teapot. "We need to keep our partners in this, or we're going down faster than a lead balloon in a vacuum." The coalition was hanging by a thread, a fragile alliance that could snap with the slightest provocation. Rena moved through the frantic station corridors, trying to channel the calm of a librarian in a burning library. The delegates seemed to be everywhere and nowhere, a mass of confused faces and conflicting agendas, each one contributing to the growing sense of impending doom. Zorg, the Glarbnak with a voice like curdled milk, shuffled over, his gelatinous form quivering with stress. "Rena, we've got a problem." "We've got lots of those, Zorg," Rena replied, her eyes scanning the room for anything that didn't spell disaster. "But this one involves the reactor." Rena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing temperature controls. "What now?" "The cooling system is failing. If we don't fix it, we're going to have a meltdown that makes Chernobyl look like a campfire." Mara, ever the purveyor of sarcasm, chimed in. "Ah yes, because what we really need right now is a nice, fiery death." Rena pinched the bridge of her nose. "We need all hands on deck. Get the engineers, the ones who haven't succumbed to panic, and make sure they know what's at stake." "The end of everything?" Zorg asked, his voice a wet whisper. "Exactly," Rena replied, not missing a beat. "Now move." As the crew scrambled to figure out how to fix a problem designed to be unsolvable, Rena felt like she was trying to juggle while riding a unicycle on a tightrope above a pit of lava. And she wasn't even good at juggling. Jax appeared beside her, looking every bit the captain he was, which is to say, slightly out of his depth but too stubborn to admit it. "You holding up?" Rena shrugged. "Holding up is a strong phrase. I'm more like, not collapsing." "Yet," he nodded. "That's the spirit." The task force was in full swing now, every species contributing their own brand of problem-solving. The Glarbnak were surprisingly adept at managing the cooling systems, their unique physiology allowing them to handle the increasing temperatures with ease. The Jackthol, for their part, were coordinating the evacuation of non-essential personnel, their multiple limbs making them excellent at multitasking. The problem, of course, was that everyone had a different idea about what essential meant. "We can't just abandon the station," Zorg protested, his voice oscillating between panic and determination. "We're not abandoning it," Rena insisted, "but we need to make sure those who are trying to fix this have a fighting chance." K-Rax, still looming, added, "And if they fail, then we fail together," Rena said, a grim smile tugging at her lips. Misery loves company, after all. There was an odd sort of camaraderie in the air, a shared sense of impending doom that somehow brought everyone closer. Or maybe it was the knowledge that no one would survive to say "I told you so." As the clock ticked down, Jax, Mara, and Rena worked alongside their newfound allies, each trying to stave off the end for just a few more moments. The station's lights flickered ominously, and the walls seemed to close in like a trash compactor set to annihilate. Jax watched the chaos unfold with an expression that could only be described as defiant resignation. "This is what they call the darkest hour, right?" Mara snorted. "Sure feels like it. But hey, if we live through this, I'm totally getting a promotion. Or at least a t-shirt." "You know," Jax replied, "there's something to be said for going out with a bang. Just not, literally." Rena, still coordinating the desperate struggle to keep the station in one piece, managed to squeeze out a laugh. "You'd better hope we make it, Jax. I don't want my ghost haunting you for eternity." Jax smirked. "You'd be a pain in the afterlife, just like you are now." There was a sudden crash, followed by the telltale sound of something heavy hitting the ground. Mara turned, half expecting to see the wall they'd been leaning on finally give up the ghost. Instead, a section of the ceiling had decided it was tired of being a ceiling and wanted to be part of the floor instead. "Well," Mara said, brushing debris off her shoulder, "at least it's not raining." "Glass half full," Jax agreed, helping her up. They pressed on, driven by a mix of desperation and stubbornness, the kind that only humans seem to have in spades. Rena was everywhere, rallying the troops with a mixture of authoritative commands and surprisingly motivational speeches considering the circumstances. And somehow, against the odds, the cooling system began showing signs of recovery. Maybe it was the collective willpower, or maybe just the simple fact that the universe had decided they'd suffered enough, at least for today. As the alarms quieted and the station settled into uneasy stability, Jax, Mara, and Rena gathered in what remained of the command center. They looked at each other, eyes filled with exhaustion and a kind of camaraderie that comes from nearly dying together several hundred times. Rena chuckled, a sound somewhere between relief and incredulity. "We did it." "Sure as hell looks that way," Mara replied, leaning back against a wall that seemed slightly more trustworthy now. Jax shook his head, a slight grin on his face. "I guess duct tape and determination really can solve anything." The crew, battered but not broken, began to regroup, the mood on Peace Station eon shifting from grim resignation to cautious optimism. It wasn't quite a victory dance, but it was close enough. K-Rax approached, his skepticism somewhat mollified by the human's resilience. "Perhaps you are not as incompetent as I first believed." "High praise," Jax responded dryly. "I'll take it." Zorg oozed over, enthusiasm writ large across his gelatinous features. "We've stabilized the reactor, for now." Rena nodded, her relief tempered by the knowledge that they'd only bought themselves a reprieve. "Good work, everyone, but let's not get too comfortable. We're still knee-deep in this galactic mess." Jax looked around the room, at the faces that had gone from strangers to allies in the crucible of crisis, and felt a pang of something resembling hope. "We've got a long way to go, but at least we're headed in the right direction." Mara clapped him on the shoulder. "And if we die trying, at least it'll make a hell of a story." As the crew set about the daunting task of repairing the station and rebuilding trust among its occupants, Rena took a moment to appreciate the small victories, however fleeting they might be. This wasn't the end, far from it, but they'd earned a moment to breathe. In the vastness of space, where the darkness was both literal and metaphorical, they'd found a way to keep the light burning a little while longer. And for a group of misfit humans on a station held together by sheer willpower and scraps, that was more than enough. Jax Voss surveyed the chaos in front of him, trying to muster the energy for another round of futile optimism. The command center was a whirlwind of activity, each officer and representative scrambling to ensure that their own hides were the least likely to be barbecued in the event of total station failure. In other words, it was a typical day on Peace Station Eon. Rena Voss, although sharing the same last name, was blessedly unrelated to Jax. She was frantically trying to bring some kind of harmony to the discordant orchestra of species that constituted their coalition. "All right, people," she called, her voice cutting through the din like a laser scalpel. "If we want to avoid becoming an interstellar cautionary tale, we need to pull together." Mara Clay stood beside Jax, arms crossed as she watched the chaos. "Pull together," she says. "Like herding cats, only if the cats were on fire and in zero-G. With any luck, we'll all get to die of natural causes," Jax replied dryly. "Like starvation when the station finally gives up the ghost." Karax, ever the pessimist with a penchant for stating the obvious, was looming near. "Humans seem to believe they can fix anything with duct tape and stubbornness." "I remain unconvinced." Jax shot him a grin. "Well, we haven't blown up yet, have we? That's gotta count for something." Elura, who had been hovering, literally, thanks to her race's natural anti-gravity capability over the proceedings, interjected with her usual brand of chilly wisdom. "Trust is not given, Captain. It must be earned." Rena, overhearing this, rolled her eyes with the patience of a saint dealing with toddlers. "Thanks for the reminder, Elura. Now, any actual suggestions on how we stop the reactor from treating us all to a cosmic barbecue?" Zorg wobbled into view, his gelatinous body radiating something that might have been interpreted as either excitement or existential dread. "We have a plan. It's wild, reckless, and highly likely to fail, just like all our best ideas." "Perfect," Mara chimed in, smirking. "Any plan that doesn't sound like a guaranteed disaster is usually too good to be true." Rena looked up from her handheld device, her brow furrowed. "All right, let's hear it. What harebrained scheme are we pinning our hopes on now?" Zorg, in a manner reminiscent of a schoolchild eager to share their latest science experiment, explained. "We reroute the auxiliary power from the defunct sections, those already lost to the vacuum and despair, and channel it into the cooling systems. It's like using a Band-Aid to fix a bullet wound, but with more sparks." Jax tilted his head, considering. "And what are the odds we don't accidentally blow ourselves up in the process?" Zorg's gelatinous form quivered with what might have been interpreted as confidence. "About 50-50, which, let's be honest, are the best odds we've had in days." Rena sighed, the sound of a woman who had long since made peace with the universe's indifference. "All right, let's run with it. If it works, we live to see another day. If it doesn't, well, at least we won't have to worry about our reputations." As the team sprang into action, the plan taking shape with the frantic energy of a last-minute school project, Jax couldn't help but feel a bizarre sort of pride. His team was a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were his ragtag bunch of misfits. "All right, people," he called, clapping his hands together. "Let's see if duct tape and sheer willpower can keep us alive." Mara, always quick with a retort, offered him a mock salute. "To living another day in the universe's most dysfunctional floating tin can." The mood in the room shifted from tense to something nearing hopeful, a rare commodity on Peace Station Eon. Even Karax seemed to realize that, against all better judgment, he was rooting for these ludicrously stubborn humans. Of course, getting the plan to work was easier said than done. The auxiliary power systems had been designed by the lowest bidder and maintained by the most lackadaisical crew this side of the Andromeda. Rena found herself navigating a maze of wires and cables, most of which appeared to have been installed by a particularly clumsy spider. "How's it going over there?" Jax called, trying to make himself heard over the intermittent alarms. Rena didn't look up from the tangled mess she was wrestling with. Oh, just another Saturday night. If Saturday nights involved life-or-death engineering puzzles, Mara, meanwhile, was coordinating the evacuation of those sections of the station that had become even less habitable than usual. Her method involved a lot of sarcasm and the occasional threat of bodily harm, both of which proved surprisingly effective. Move it, people. Unless you fancy becoming a permanent exhibit in the Grand Museum of Cosmic Failures. Her voice echoed through the corridors, driving the various species to action with a speed born of self-preservation. Even the Jackthal, never ones to be rushed, found themselves hurried along by the relentless march of doom. As the plan began to take effect, the station started to stabilize. The alarms, ever present in their cacophony, began to quiet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the walls ceased their ominous shuddering. Rena, finally able to breathe without fear of inhaling vacuum, leaned against the nearest bulkhead. I think it's working. Zorg, who had been monitoring the power reroute with the intensity of a gambler on a hot streak, nodded his gelatinous head. We might just pull this off. Karax, always the skeptic, crossed his many arms but didn't voice any objections. His silence was as close to agreement as the Jackthal ever got. Jax, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to ease, allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. Well, I'll be damned. It looks like duct tape and determination do work after all. The command center erupted into a cheer, a sound that was both strange and uplifting in the otherwise grim surroundings. It was a small victory, but in their situation, any victory was worth celebrating. All right, people, Rena said, her voice thick with relief and no small amount of authority. We've bought ourselves some time. Let's use it to ensure we don't find ourselves in this mess again. Mara clapped Jax on the back, her grin as wide as the Milky Way. Not bad for a bunch of humans in a tin can, huh? Not bad at all, Jax agreed. Now let's see if we can manage to keep things running without another immediate crisis. It was a tall order, but for the first time in days, it felt like they might actually have a fighting chance. Jax watched as the various species began to coordinate, the chaos of before replaced by a tentative cooperation. They were far from out of the woods, but at least now they had a path forward. As the crew began the long process of repairing the station's systems, Rena turned to Jax, her expression a mixture of pride and exhaustion. For a moment there, I thought we were actually going to make it. Jax chuckled, the sound more relieved than amused. Never doubt the power of desperation, Rena. It's the best motivator there is. Mara, eavesdropping as usual, nodded. And if we keep this up, maybe we'll get to retire somewhere nice. Like a planet that doesn't actively try to kill us every other minute. Rena laughed, a sound that was music to Jax's ears after the constant din of alarms. A girl can dream, right? As the station settled into an uneasy peace, Jax found himself reflecting on the events of the past few days. They'd faced down disaster, pulled together in the face of impossible odds, and somehow managed to come out the other side intact. It was the kind of story that would go down in the annals of history, assuming, of course, they didn't all meet an untimely end in the next 24 hours. Karax approached, his skepticism somewhat softened. Perhaps you humans are not as incompetent as I first believed. Jax grinned, the expression rakish and self-assured. High praise indeed. So what's next on our interstellar to-do list? Lura, floating nearby, interjected with her usual brand of sage advice. We have won a battle, but the war continues. The threat of sabotage remains. Rena nodded, her expression serious once more. We've got to find out who's behind this and why. Otherwise, we're just setting ourselves up for another disaster. Jax sighed, the weight of leadership settling back onto his shoulders. All right, folks, let's get to work. We've bought ourselves some time, now let's use it to make sure we don't end up right back in the same situation. As the crew dispersed, ready to tackle the next set of challenges, Jax couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the universe's cruel machinations, but it was there all the same. In the cold, indifferent expanse of space, they'd managed to hold onto something vital, the determination to keep going, no matter how grim the odds. And in a world where nothing was certain, that was the greatest victory of all. As Rena, Mara, and the rest of the crew set about the arduous task of repairing the station and seeking out the saboteur in their midst, Jax knew that their story was far from over. They were damaged, flawed, and far from perfect, but they were still here. And as long as they had breath in their bodies, they'd fight to keep it that way. After all, what was life without a little danger, a little chaos, and a lot of duct tape? Jax Voss stood at the center of the command room, watching the makeshift coalition of cosmic misfits argue over a plan that was slimmer than a politician's promise. It was the kind of scene that suggested there was hope tucked somewhere beneath the cynicism, like a rotten apple hiding a seed of potential. The room was filled with enough tension to snap a steel cable, and the smell, well, let's just say the wonders of intergalactic travel hadn't extended to odor control in zero gravity. Somewhere in the corner, someone had given up on the fight against alien BO. "All right, everyone, shut it." Jax's voice cut through the din like a rusty blade. Not quite a leader's call, but it got the job done. If it didn't, Mara was always there to drag compliance with threats of creative violence. "Zorg, you've got the floor. God help us all." Zorg, wobbly as ever, took center stage, his gelatinous form jiggling with what could either be dubbed excitement or a minor seismic event. "We need to stabilize the central reactor using the auxiliary flow to bypass the damaged circuits," he began, his voice a unique blend of optimism and impending doom. Mara leaned in, whispering to Jax with a grin, "Here we go. Prepare to trust our fates to a plan that sounds like it was hatched by a clown on a unicycle." "At least a clown's got balance," Jax replied, not quite under his breath, earning a snort from K-Rax, who pretended not to listen. Rena, never far from her handheld device, glanced up, her expression as serious as a tax audit. "And what are the odds this doesn't end with us in a million tiny pieces scattered across space?" Zorg hesitated, his jiggling halting for a moment that passed for thought. "Well, if explosions were the goal, we might only manage a few hundred pieces." "Reassuring," Elura commented dryly, floating effortlessly beside the console. "Perhaps we could aim for fewer." The council chamber, a circular room filled with representatives from different worlds, all of whom had mastered the art of glaring, listened with a mixture of skepticism and reluctant hope. It wasn't every day you handed the remains of your dignity over to a sentient jelly and a bunch of humans who could barely manage their own chaos. "We don't exactly have much of a choice," Jax continued, trying to steer the conversation away from Zorg's persuasive wobbles. "The sabotage isn't going to stop. We're dealing with people who'd rather see us fail than find peace, which makes them the most committed group of morons I've ever had the displeasure of encountering." K-Rax, arms crossed and skepticism practically written into his very DNA, nodded along. "The humans have a point. We fight together or we die separately, a lesson we Jackthol learned the hard way." "Quite the revolution you're spearheading," Mara quipped. "Next, you'll be organizing group hugs and singing songs around the reactor." K-Rax's glare could have sharpened knives, but even he couldn't deny the truth simmering under Mara's sarcasm. "Touché, human." The council, perhaps inspired by the human stubbornness or simply too exhausted by the absurdity to argue, found themselves working together. Trust was a currency rarely traded on Peace Station Eon, and yet here they were, cobbling together alliances from spare parts and spit. Rena took charge, her eyes scanning the room. "We need to identify the saboteurs and secure the critical areas. I'll need 2 teams, one to handle the internal systems, the other to monitor external threats." "Volunteers." A chaotic shuffle ensued, delegates shifting like schoolchildren avoiding eye contact to escape detention. but a few stepped forward, brave, stupid, or both. Jax watched with something resembling pride, though he would have called it indigestion if asked. Good. Divide and conquer. We lock this place down tighter than a miser's purse and find out who's trying to kill us. Mara offered a low whistle. Optimistic, aren't we? Hey, optimism's just pessimism with a better publicist, Jax shrugged. It's all we've got. The teams dispersed, each member with a task, a purpose. The corridors filled with movement, the cacophony of alarms and hurried footsteps creating a symphony of urgency that felt oddly comforting. Rena, ready to lead her ragtag squad through the bowels of the station, motioned for Jax to follow. You coming, Captain Optimism? Wouldn't miss it for all the clean air in the galaxy, Jax replied, tagging along, his boots echoing in the metal corridors. As they moved, Mara kept pace, her sarcasm a comforting constant amidst the madness. So, what's plan B if we all get spaced? Jax smirked. I hear decompression's a quick way to lose a few pounds. As they rounded a corner, the corridor opened up to one of the station's viewing galleries, a grand misnomer if ever there was one, given that most views consisted of distant stars and the occasional space trash drifting past. Zorg, busy rerouting power with Rena and a few brave volunteers, seemed to be in his element. Or as close to an element as a gelatinous blob could be. Power rerouting initiated. We've got about 10 minutes before the system realizes what we're doing and throws a cosmic tantrum. And how do we know when that happens? Rena asked, her fingers dancing over the controls, eyes never leaving the screen. Zorg's body wobbled in what could have been interpreted as a shrug. You'll probably feel a sudden urge to scream. Comforting, really, Mara remarked, eyeing the tangle of cables with suspicion. Any chance we get a manual on this thing? Maybe a warning label that reads, "Caution, may explode." The team worked feverishly, the stubborn determination of humans and aliens alike blending into a cohesive, albeit desperate, effort to stabilize the station. Cables were connected, rerouted, and occasionally duct-taped into submission as the minutes ticked by. K-Rax, having completed his patrol, emerged from a side corridor, his many arms coiled with purpose. No sign of external threats. Internal systems are secure for now, but we must remain vigilant. Nice work, Jax acknowledged. Guess we're all in this together, huh? K-Rax's nod was almost respectful, a rare gesture from the Jackthal. For now, at least. As the final connections were made and the power reroute completed, the station seemed to hold its breath, a pregnant pause filled with the hope that things might just hold together. Rena keyed in the last command, the hum of the reactor settling into a steady, reassuring rhythm. I think we've got it. Systems are stabilizing. The gallery erupted into a cheer, a sound as alien as any to Peace Station Eon, where pessimism was the lingua franca and failure an old friend. But for once, their collective effort had paid off. Feels like winning the lottery, Mara commented, a smirk on her lips. Except instead of money, we get to live another day. High stakes, low returns, Jax agreed. But I'll take it. The Council, inspired by the humans' tenacity and begrudging practicality, found themselves united in a way they hadn't imagined possible. The realization that cooperation could be more than a political maneuver, something genuinely beneficial, was a novel concept for many, but one that seemed to stick. Guess you've shown us all a thing or two, Eldura mused, her anti-gravity form floating gracefully above the console. Humans and their duct tape saved the day again. Yeah, well, we're stubborn like that, Jax responded, a wry grin playing across his features. Never underestimate the power of a determined idiot. As the teams reconvened, the atmosphere was one of cautious optimism. They'd managed to stave off disaster for the moment, but the shadow of sabotage still loomed large. Rena addressed the group, her voice firm and resolute. We've bought ourselves some time, but the real work starts now. We need to identify the saboteurs and ensure this doesn't happen again. The council members nodded, newfound respect in their eyes. The distrust and animosity that had characterized their earlier meetings seemed to have thawed. replaced by a grudging acknowledgement of human ingenuity. "Looks like we're not such a lost cause after all," Mara quipped, arms folded across her chest. "Guess we'll have to save the universe another day, or at least this tin can," Jax added, watching as the various species began to coordinate efforts to root out the saboteurs. Karax, perhaps inspired by the humans' unity, spoke up. "Trust is earned, not given, but you have shown that it can be done." Jax nodded, genuinely touched by the sentiment. "We're only as good as our allies make us." "Glad to have you all on our side." As the station settled into an uneasy peace, the council began to work towards a more permanent solution, fortified by the realization that, despite their differences, they could accomplish the impossible when united. Jax watched as the teams dispersed, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. They'd faced down disaster and lived to tell the tale. The path ahead was still fraught with danger, but for the first time it felt like they might just have a fighting chance. Turning to Rena, Jax added, "Think we'll get a medal for this?" Rena laughed, a sound that echoed through the metal corridors like a promise of better days. "Maybe, or at least a nice plaque that says, 'We didn't die.'" "Good enough for me," Jax replied, a rare moment of humor lighting his features. "Now let's go find those saboteurs and give them a piece of our mind." With that, Jax, Mara, Rena, and the rest of their ragtag team set off on the next leg of their journey. The challenge of uncovering the saboteurs remained, but with newfound resolve and a coalition forged in the fires of adversity, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. In the vast, indifferent expanse of space, they'd found something worth fighting for: each other. And as long as they had that, they could face anything the universe threw their way. Determined, flawed, and far from perfect, they pressed on, knowing that whatever happened, they had already achieved the impossible. And that was a victory worth more than any medal. "Well, if that doesn't feel like squeezing a miracle out of a rock," Jax remarked, looking around the now stabilized command room. The alarms had mercifully ceased their incessant symphony, leaving behind a blessed silence that felt foreign yet welcome. Rena twirled her handheld device, finally able to put it away with a relieved sigh. "I suppose we should savor this peace before the universe comes back to remind us how much it despises us." "Peace Station Eon," Jax said, shaking his head. "Name's always been a bit of a punchline, hasn't it?" Mara leaned against the wall, arms crossed, a smug grin on her face. "I'd call it ironic if I thought it was funny." Karax joined them, his many eyes scanning the room with a newfound respect. "Your species is strange, illogical but effective." High praise coming from someone with more arms than a child's nightmare, Mara shot back with a smirk. Zorg, still jiggling with a kind of pride, blobbled over. "We should celebrate. This level of cooperation is unprecedented." "Unprecedented and, if we're honest, probably unrepeatable," Jax noted. "But hey, maybe we'll get lucky and survive long enough to make it a habit." As they stood there, the mix of species, a ragtag coalition held together by duct tape and stubborn willpower, something started to change. It was subtle, more a shift in the atmosphere than anything tangible. The distrust and animosity that had once filled the room began to melt away, replaced by a cautious camaraderie. Like co-workers who had just been through the world's worst team-building exercise, Renner raised a hypothetical glass to the group. "To not dying today." "To not dying," they echoed, the absurdity of the toast lost on no one. "So," Mara continued, "what's next on the agenda? More not dying." "Maybe we shoot for a cozy coup d'etat. First, we find our saboteurs," Jax said, glancing at the diverse assembly of beings. "Then we make sure they don't get another shot at turning us into cosmic debris." Karax nodded, his arms folded in what could either be agreement or an attempt to keep himself warm. "I suggest we start with the usual suspects. Anyone who looks too innocent." "Ah, yes, the guilty until proven really guilty approach," Mara mused. "Always a classic." In the ensuing hours, the station was a hive of activity. Delegates and crew members scuttled back and forth, setting up checkpoints, reassembling security systems and double-checking protocols that hadn't been looked at since the last major political scandal a few light years away. Rena took on the role of unofficial coordinator, her handheld device now serving as a beacon for collective efforts. Wherever she went, people followed, probably because she had that rare combination of being both competent and slightly terrifying. "Rena," Jax called as he ducked away from an overly enthusiastic repair drone. "You ever think maybe we're too good at this?" She paused, considering. "I'd like to think it's our winning personalities." "Right," Jax replied. "The kind of personality that wins you a free punch in the face." Around them, the council began to work not just as individual factions vying for dominance, but as a united force. It was, Jax reflected, as if they'd all finally realized that the universe was more likely to kill them than they were to kill each other. An epiphany writ large across the cosmos. "I see you finally got everyone playing nice," Eldura commented, floating just above Jax's shoulder. "Yeah, well, nothing inspires teamwork like impending doom," Jax quipped, watching as a group of delegates hashed out strategies for the future. "And trust me," Mara added, "nothing bonds people faster than knowing the air could be sucked out of your lungs at any moment." "But what about after?" Zorg asked, his gelatinous form quivering with genuine curiosity. "Once we find the saboteurs, then what?" Rena's eyes narrowed, her expression one of determined resolution. "Then we make sure they understand just how unwelcome they are." With extreme prejudice. "The kick 'em in the space pants and send them packing strategy," Mara said. "I like it." As the hours turned into an endless day, Jax found himself surprised by the effectiveness of this ragtag team. Sure, they were held together by luck, circumstance, and a few layers of duct tape, but somehow it worked. "You know," Jax said to Mara as they watched the council's newfound unity in action, "I think we might have just pulled off the impossible." She shrugged, ever the cynic. "Nothing like a near-death experience to give you perspective, or PTSD. Rumors began circulating, small whispers that the coalition was more than a temporary alliance of necessity, that it might actually be a force for good. It was an idea both laughable and oddly inspiring. "Do you think this will last?" Zorg asked, his voice tinged with hope. Jax considered. "Doubt it. But if history's taught me anything, it's that sometimes even the worst odds can surprise you." Back in the council chamber, delegates were drafting new accords, plans for increased cooperation, and the establishment of a formal investigative committee to root out the saboteurs. Karax, watching the proceedings with a skeptical eye, or perhaps 12, turned to Jax. "You humans have a saying, don't you? Something about lemons and lemonade." "Yeah, we do," Jax replied. "But I think of it more like turning radioactive waste into slightly less dangerous waste." Optimistic as ever, Mara teased. Together they observed the council's proceedings, each species working towards a common goal. For once, Peace Station Eon lived up to its lofty name. Though the path had been fraught with danger, distrust, and a fair share of bad jokes, they'd somehow found a way through. In a corner, Rena was busy coordinating the next steps, her fingers a blur over her device. Despite everything, she seemed genuinely pleased with how things were unfolding. Eldura floated nearby, observing with a serene detachment. "Perhaps your species is not completely hopeless. Thanks for the ringing endorsement," Jax said dryly. "Glad to know we're not cosmic garbage, just the recycling bin." As the day drew to a close, there was a sense of cautious optimism in the air. They'd faced down sabotage and emerged not only intact but stronger for it. The council was more united than ever, with new accords drafted and plans made for future cooperation. Standing at the edge of the command room, Jack surveyed the scene before him. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be, but maybe that was okay. Maybe perfection was overrated anyway. Turning to Mara, he asked, "So what do you think? Did we just save the universe or what?" She grinned. "Saved it? Nah. But we might have just bought it a little more time. And in this business, that's about as good as it gets." With a final look at the station's newfound unity, They both laughed, a sound that echoed across the room, a reminder of all they'd overcome. It was the kind of laughter that comes not from joy but from relief, the realization that they'd faced down the impossible and lived to tell the tale. As they headed toward the door, ready to confront whatever new challenges lay ahead, Jax paused. "Think we'll look back on this and laugh," Mara shrugged. "If we survive long enough to get there, maybe." And with that, they stepped into the future, uncertain but undeterred. They were a coalition forged in adversity, bound by necessity, and armed with nothing more than stubborn determination and a sense of humor. In the vast, indifferent expanse of space, they'd found something worth fighting for each other. And as long as they had that, they could face whatever the universe threw their way. Rena caught up with them, her expression one of mock exasperation. "You too planning to save the universe without me?" "Wouldn't dream of it," Jax replied, throwing an arm around her shoulder as they walked. Together, they faced the unknown, knowing that whatever happened next, they were stronger together than apart. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. As they moved forward, toward whatever awaited them beyond the stars, Jax couldn't help but smile. The future was uncertain, the path ahead fraught with challenges, but for the first time it felt like they might just have a fighting chance. In the end, maybe that was all anyone could hope for.